Hello and welcome to Data Demystified, the podcast where we look beyond the buzzwords to find value in MarTech, AI, and data for marketing. My name is Kevin van Kalkeren, I'm CPO at Onmark, and in this episode we'll dive into the widely used term, single source of truth. What is it and why should you care? So, I think the main thought here is that we have to talk about trust in data. And trust in data that starts with clarity, not just having the dashboards. And having that trust in data is not just an IT concern. It might be a marketing advantage. So first, the buzzword itself, single source of truth. You might see abbreviations like SSOT, which basically means everyone in the organization, all your colleagues, they refer to the same consistent data source for decision making. And there might be an agglomeration of different data sources itself. So it might be marketing and sales and customer support and what have you. But they are bound in the same infrastructure, accessible by the same people in the same manner, and they're also standardized in what they mean, definitions and all that. This can be used for decision-making, reporting, so it does not mean just the one dashboard, it doesn't mean just the one tool. It means that we have alignment both in definitions as well as technical access on the underlying data definitions and structure. So that means that when we talk about sales, when we talk about what a conversion is or what an order is, that we all know what that actually means, where the data came from, that the numbers are add up, even if we compare them over time, that when customer support talks to a customer with a certain number, that they have the same customer number than as sales does, that when we talk about a certain lead status, that we know that sales and marketing are looking at the same thing. So this is very much a data issue on its own. It's a complicated subject matter to really master because in effect, there's not just the one tool that generates data for this, right? There's a lot of data tools that might have real-time data, batch data, daily basis of data, weekly data. You might pull in data from external sources that only give you data once a month, once a week. There might be partners. For instance, if you have affiliate traffic coming in, you might get affiliate sales every week to verify them with. You might have Google Ads data influx to tell you what the costs were of your clicks. All those different data sources have to be, if this is your vision, have to be consolidated to have the same meaning, same quality, and so on. This means that sales, marketing, and product all have the same version of this data. They can refer to the term active user in the same manner, define it once, and that's it. The definition is then used everywhere and by everyone, or at least everyone that should. It might live in a data warehouse. It might then be used by different tools. So again, it's not like the data is just found in one place. Could also mean that there's different BI tools that use the same data warehouse underneath. It might be that there's a reporting suite for top management that just gets a PDF version of the same thing, and that day-to-day marketing has a different suite for this. But overall, it's good to know that when we're talking about new users, when we're talking about retention or maybe churn or customer lifetime value, that it's all based on the same thing. The same single source of truth. Now, why is that important? And why is it not just an IT party, basically? I think marketing lives and dies by interpretation of data, right? If different teams are using different truths, strategy turns into guesswork. So that means that we start debating about different versions of the data, different definitions. A lot of time is spent there, creates a lot of friction between teams, which can be avoided and which should be avoided to become effective. For instance, if sales says we have 100 leads, marketing says, no, we delivered you 150. That means we'll talk about those 50 leads. What are they? What aren't they? Where did they come from? Maybe you have to deduplicate stuff. Maybe we've talked too much about certain clients. And that discussion about the 50 leads will not bring any value directly. I mean, yes, the bad data quality is something we should talk about, something we should address, something we should solve. But only once we've solved that can we go to create value. And making sure that this discussion can happen once, but if it happens twice, there should be a process that does this better. That's kind of, I think, the takeaway early on of this episode. If it's something returns as a problem every time, you should probably make some kind of alignment about this, right? Same thing goes for web analytics. Tool A says we've got 15 visitors. Tool B says 17. Then often we end up discussing what is the actual truth. And not only does that create frustration between colleagues, especially if there's different camps, a camp of tool A and a camp of tool B, and we start discussing what the definitions are between visitors. What is a visitor? When does a visit end? When does a visit stop? How do we deduplicate visits across different devices? Is that something we can actually do? Is the right infrastructure in place for that? Do we have the proper consent for that? It's a very big discussion, which does not create value directly. It's important to have that data correctly. It doesn't create value directly. So once we're discussing what's the difference between tool A and tool B, what is right? Is tool A right? Is tool B right? We're not talking about what does 15, 16, or 17 visitors actually mean to us. What is the takeaway message here? Not in terms of what tool is right, but in terms of the effectiveness of our marketing, of our sales, of our website, the thing that really matters, rather than the logistics and the mechanics of running a business. So if we don't have agreement on those basics, trust erodes, not just in our colleagues, but also in the tools we use, in the data we have, that affects our campaigns, because we're not trusting the campaigns anymore, or maybe we're not optimizing as much as we can. It affects our budgets because we're spending a lot of time on debating tools, debating data. We're not spending it in acquisition. Of course, our customers are not helped because we're not optimizing for them. We're first spending a lot of time discussing what is right, and overall performance is going to erode from that too. So it's like you're running a race where every runner is using a different stopwatch, right? You cannot win that way. We're all going the same direction, but not in the same type of manner. We're not taking the same parkour. It doesn't really help. Something else that we should probably talk about, and this is something I think that is a business brought on risk, but something that is definitely not just IT's pet peeve, if we can even call it that. Shadow IT. Sounds very heroic, sounds like a good movie, but it isn't. It's when people typically in the business, we don't trust data enough, we don't have the right access to certain amounts of data, which is when we start building our own silos or using our own different tools, maybe condoned, maybe legal even. But once we start, for a lack of better data access or lack of better data understanding, or maybe just a lack of data quality, we start using other tools that kind of do the same thing, but allow us to do our jobs better. You start getting those differences between two tools, because suddenly in the day-to-day practice, you're using tool A because that allows you to do your day-to-day job, whereas management is looking at tool B, and that's the official reporting suite. And if those two differ, who is right? Because you're doing your job, you're working hard for it, and at the same time, you're being managed, monitored, and maybe even performance reviewed based on tool B that's not allowing you to do your job, and vice versa, right? So this is a vicious cycle, because once this doesn't happen overnight. It's not like we suddenly decide we're going to break the IT architecture. But once we start getting into a motion where we all kind of accept that data quality is not as it should be, or data access is not as it should be, and we start creating our own workarounds so that the landscape becomes more scattered and the data quality becomes more scattered, and no one has any oversight of what we're doing at, because sales is using a different CRM automation tool or a lead generation tool, because that allows them more freedom. Marketing is using their own tool where the same customer records are stored. And then there's operations or customer support or success that have their own tool, because that allows them to perform better based on tickets or maybe revenue targets. That becomes an issue. And once that cycle starts, it's hard to break that vicious cycle. And more time will be spent on actually debating the differences and making sure we are aligned. Whereas if you have the same single source of truth, that friction is resolved way easier once you get to that point. Now, in every episode, we'll also take a look at a common belief or a buzzword and see what holds up and what doesn't. So, like previous episodes, we now have a question from a listener.
What is the best reason to want to have real-time data?
Yeah, so real-time data, it's a big USP typically on the box of whatever tools. It's a real-time, which sounds like you can make an impact very fast, right? And I think it has its value. It's great if you need real time. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you want to do actions, have interventions in real time. For instance, if we want to do personalization on the website, or I want to make sure people retain on my website, don't want them to go away, or maybe once they go away, I want to send them a real quick email saying, hey, you forgot this in your basket. That's when you need real time, right? If I want to update the next page they look at on my website based on their previous search engine behavior, that's real time data I need. It might be that it's resolved within the tool. So if I have a tool that optimizes my search engine for me, maybe tied to my product management software, great. If I don't, or if I have a different decision engine or a different personalization engine that does this for me, we'll need some kind of real-time integration for that. So that's fine. Same thing goes for recommendation engines overall. Based on your previous search history, these are the recommended products for you. Typically, those engines will come with their own collection software or an API to send data to from the client. So typically that is covered. But if we're talking reporting or analytics, that's a different use case, I think. So another real-time use case might be churn, if someone's going away or not. Might be technical monitoring, or maybe even fraud use cases where you want to prevent people maybe writing damage claims that didn't really occur, or identity fraud. All those things, they need real-time impact, real-time opportunities. Otherwise, real-time is often more about eye candy, optics. We might like having a campaign dashboard up on the wall in our office that has a blip every time a new lead comes in. That's very cool. And if that gives us the idea, hey, this is doing quite well, that might be a case for real time, because it helps create value for our stakeholders. It might create momentum internally, but it's not for actual decision making. We're not using it that much just for the reason of creating value for our customers. Might still be valid, but it's not the same thing. So I guess the question is, when is real time necessary? When real time is necessary? I'd say if your decisions are monthly, quarterly, you don't need real time data. You just need it reliably, and you need it to be consistent. All right. So in the previous episode, I talked about how do we become data driven, and I then posited that the data driven starts by being value driven first. I don't mean that in the ethical sense or the moral sense. I just mean to be able to optimize based on data, we have to have a definition about what the value is for certain customers, because only then can we decide what data to use to optimize for those customers, right? The customers that we want to optimize for, that we want to have on board, that we want to keep, and those that we don't, or the value that we can bring to those customers. That does mean that we have to have a discussion about what that value actually is, right? So before we measure the value even, we can see how we want to define that value. Is it based on the purchases in a year? Is it based on the first time purchase? Is it some kind of returning revenue structure where we calculate the average retention of a customer, the average lifetime, and then multiply it by that? Is there a risk factor involved? Is it in terms of orders per year? All of those can be very valid. So I don't think there's a gold standard for this, depending on the industry maybe, but not overall. But we cannot optimize for value. We cannot work on data to do this if we don't have an underlying infrastructure, a language, a common definition about how we reliably express, in this case, for instance, value. So how do we start? I think for any business, big or small, very data-driven or very low maturity for data, we can start by a simple data glossary. Basically a document where you mention, this is what I mean when we talk lead. And we have to be specific. This is not the most sexy, interesting stuff when you want to be working on great campaigns and doing cool advertising. But overall, defining what a lead is, and once that lead it leaves the cold status and goes to hot or warm, what a conversion is, what the customer value is, we have to write that down and be very specific. And then make sure that we also involve different stakeholders. So this is not just an IT party. It's also not just a marketing party. And then from that, we can move away from spreadsheet chaos. So I really would try not then reinvent the wheel for every new spreadsheet, every new analysis you're going to run. And create new calculations for leads there. So make sure that, and this doesn't have to be a very fancy data warehouse, but make sure that leads are calculated. If there's a column that says leads, they should follow the data glossary definition. Otherwise, give them another name, but don't confuse terms. Don't conflate them once you have that status. So you have to be really strict on adhering to the definitions in the data glossary. And then don't try and make 15 different versions of a Google sheet. Use the one data source. This could be the one sheet. Could be a data set, a database, especially with current AI settings and the way how easy cloud works. This doesn't have to be that complicated. It's not like 20 years ago when it was very complicated even for smaller companies. So this comes with a certain level of governance. And what I would do from there is also, if this doesn't come naturally, audit the current tools you have. Where are we using metrics that are being duplicated or are diverging from the definition we have, right? So, like I said, sales probably has a CRM tool. The CRM tool comes with a definition of leads. I know certain of those tools just have their own definitions of leads that cannot be changed. That is fine. We can accept that, but then maybe we should export the data somewhat, integrate them. I mean, we can integrate tools like Lead Info with your CRM systems. You can, then you can have that exported in PDF shape or CSV or whatever to a different data source or just a Google sheet. But at least make sure that then in that process, that data is transformed. And in the current age, there's tools like Zapier and Make that do this for you, right? You can actually make those workflows yourself. So even then, you don't have to make your own ETL tool. You don't have to have DBT budget, which is a cool platform if you can afford it, to be able to transform the data yourself, or use AWS Glue for very complex ETL processes. So once we have an idea of where in our value chain metrics definitions differ, where we are duplicating them, where the differences lie, and we have the golden standard of the data glossary, which should be a broader discussion than just marketing or just sales, but you should have a broader discussion. Then we can go about how do we standardize this. And for some cases, there might not be a need for standardization. Some metrics might only apply to one department. Then we can just use the definition they use. But for instance, something like a lead is very pivotal. I'm not a marketeer myself. I'm only responsible for marketing within our company. But even then, I've had plenty of discussions where I was talking to sales about what I thought was a lead we delivered to them. And they didn't view it as a lead because it didn't tick off the one thing that was part of the lead definition. And the more subjective those definitions are, the harder it is going to be to follow up on those and actually avoid the friction of discussion. So give yourself a bit of a break and make sure the definitions are in order and as smart as possible. If you want to challenge your organization, by the way, I'd say flip the script. Ask your operations team or your IT team, what do you think a conversion is? And then see what happens. Because this is not, like I said, this is not just an IT party. This should really be carried by the entire business, because the time spent on bad data and differences in definition, that's going to come out of your pocket. That's going to be a marketing and sales frustration point, and it's going to cost you effectiveness. Despite maybe IT being mad about the shadow IT, it's you that has to work in this and make sure there's value for the customer and value for you. Now, if you're looking to sound smart at your next social gathering, here's a casual hot take you can just throw out there at the next Tricks table. Data-driven companies aren't the ones with the most data. They're the ones where people actually trust the data they use and have access to. So maybe 10 years ago, or even further, when big data really hit peak hype, having more data was definitely a competitive advantage. So this speaks to the fact that maybe 10, 15 years ago, when the big data hype was at its peak, having more data was a challenge on its own. It was a new unlocked opportunity, given there was more infrastructure to mine the data, actually derive value from it. So having bulks of data, that alone could have been a competitive advantage. These days, it's not so much. There's different tools that produce their own data. We have plenty of data, typically, even in smaller companies, but it might be very scattered. And that, combined with bad definitions and maybe bad oversight, leads to a lack of confidence in the data. So, and if you have the confidence, we don't spend a lot of time discussing that data, and we can now make quicker decisions. Also, what that means today, we talked about how do we align the data from data of marketing and sales. So if that's aligned, we have trust between the parties as well. So all the data sources that we have coming in contribute to the same single source of truth. That trust in that alignment, that reduces friction, and it turns who's right debates into what do we do with these debates? So that stimulates collaboration. So as a follow-up, at that drinks table, I'd ask, how does your company build trust in marketing data across teams? Let's see what they bring up. So, to recap this episode, a single source of truth isn't about control. It's about confidence and collaboration. Think about what that means for your company. Start with data glossary. Start with standardization where you can. If you have questions about this, feel free to reach out to us. And if you have questions for our buzzword breakdown, please do the same. For now, thank you for listening. And if you'd like to know more about these topics, data, MarTech, AI, check us out for our next episode. Bye-bye.